So lately I've been thinking quite a lot about the next Battlefield game, which is most likely going to come out in 2020. My guess is probably around autumn or early winter. I know it's pretty much a whole year away from this video being made, and at the moment, we haven't got a clue what the game is going to be called or what it's going to be about. There's a few rumours flying around on the internet about it possibly being Bad Company free. But of course, these are just rumours at the end of the day and should be taken with a pinch of salt. Nothing's been confirmed as of yet. But there are quite a few things indicating that the next Battlefield title could potentially be a brilliant game. Possibly even one of the best in the franchise so far. Which I have to say is pretty exciting, especially if DICE managed to pull it off. In this video, I want to talk more about the reasons why Battlefield 2020 should be something to look forward to, and why fans will probably want to keep it on their radar. So in no particular order, one of the more obvious reasons to get excited about the next Battlefield game is the fact that it'll most likely be coming out on next-gen consoles, the PS5 and the new Xbox, both also scheduled to release during the latter half of 2020 as well. Chances are, the next Battlefield will be one of the launch titles for those consoles, and it'll be one of the first games to take advantage of that extra power, allowing the game to handle better graphics and run a bit smoother whilst doing so too. Of course, this is great news if you're planning on getting one of those new consoles, and it's great news for the developers too, because the PS5 and the new Xbox are going to be much more in line with modern PCs, allowing the devs to go to town on adding extra detail and realistic assets, without having to worry about hardware limitations getting in the way of their precious work. This is good news for PC players too, because it means that the devs will be more focused on showing off their graphics and visuals more than ever, rather than dumbing them down to get their games to work on dated technology. This extra focus on graphics will probably translate over to the PC version of Battlefield quite nicely, because everyone knows that with every new console launch, developers of games work extra hard to make their creations stand out amongst the crowd and look as gorgeous as possible, to drive more sales for the newer consoles, and to make them look like a noticeable step up from last-gen games. So basically, graphics-wise, Battlefield 2020 will most likely look bloody amazing, and take full advantage of all that extra power. A fine example of this being the case in the past was with Battlefield 4, which just so happened to be a launch title for the current gen consoles, and set the benchmark for graphics in Battlefield games for that moment in time, with them still looking nice even by these days' standards. Battlefield 2020 could essentially be the phoenix of the franchise, rising up from the ashes of Battlefield 5 to deliver something that's going to appeal to the fans, get everyone back on the hype train, and basically put the franchise back on the map. Whether you love it or hate it, there's no denying that DICE buggered up with Battlefield 5, and pretty much drove a massive portion of its fanbase and veteran players away from the franchise they once loved. From design flaws to controversy to delays to bugs to downright bad decision making, the list goes on. And there's many reasons why people don't like the game and were disappointed by it. Although it is slowly improving, I think it's a bit too late to encourage a lot of those players to come back, because quite simply the damage has already been done and people have moved on. But although it's recently had some pretty dark days, this doesn't mean the end of the Battlefield franchise at all. If anything, it can be seen as a valuable lesson to DICE which they can learn a lot from, allowing them to identify where they screwed up and how to make sure they don't do it again the next time around. Some of these things might include focusing on the stuff that Battlefield players prefer the most, adding more maps and content for multiplayer rather than wasting development time on other things like Combined Arms and Battle Royale. Going back to the drawing board and back to its roots would probably be a good idea, scrapping experimental ideas like attrition and MMGs, and basically designing the game for its biggest long-term fans, without trying to take too many risky decisions and copy any popular trends. There's no need to reinvent the wheel here, and like the saying goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I think DICE will probably take all of the criticism with Battlefield 5 on board, and come back strong, using this valuable feedback to create a fun, immersive, yet familiar game that the fans are going to enjoy. So there's no evidence to suggest where the next Battlefield game will be taking place or what time period it's going to be based around. Not yet anyway. There hasn't been any proper announcements for the game and no mention of what it's even going to be called. But we can make some pretty good predictions and speculate that Battlefield 2020 certainly won't be taking us back to the First or Second World Wars. I'm 99% certain of this, and if I'm wrong, I'll eat my face. Battlefield 1 took us to the Great War, Battlefield 5 took us to the Second World War, sort of. And well, DICE would be pretty crazy to go back and do them again for the third time in a row. It's pretty obvious that a lot of the fans are gagging for a modern day Battlefield title, similar to some of the older games like Battlefields 3 and 4. And a clear example of this can be seen with the hype built up by Modern Warfare, a game that stylistically is what a lot of the people kinda want. This hasn't really been done in the franchise for a while now, except for maybe Battlefield Hardline, which technically isn't really a military shooter, and it's often perceived as more of a spin-off title. A lot of Battlefield fans want to take down helicopters with RPGs. They want big improvements to environmental destruction whenever they slap a load of C4 onto something, and they want to wield those modern day guns and play around with some more advanced technology again. Don't get me wrong, going back in time to revisit older wars was a pretty interesting thing to do, which I personally thought was a good idea, but it's definitely time for Battlefield to move back to the present day, or even go further into the future, though I think that would be a much riskier move to pull off successfully at this moment in time, especially with all the negative press that Battlefield 5's received. So I reckon DICE are probably going to play it safe next time around and try to deliver something that's going to please the majority of its fan base, a modern day military shooter, possibly with a similar sort of gritty, mature design style to the likes of Battlefield 1. I think one of the biggest things that DICE can take away from Battlefield 5, and well, pretty much all of the games in the Battlefield franchise, is that multiplayer is key. It's by far the most important aspect of the game that the vast majority of its players buy the game for. And if your game isn't focusing on that the most, then it's quite simply not going to be well received or build any sort of hype. Battlefield 5 had a bit of an identity crisis when it first came out, being a jack of all trades, master of none. With the devs really trying to build a game that could technically appeal to everyone, having multiplayer, single player, co-op, battle royale, practice modes and so on, rather than honing in and perfecting the most important thing that all the fans actually get the game for, the multiplayer. Battlefield 2020 will literally need to be a much more multiplayer focused game, with lots of maps, weapons and modes to essentially make up for the lack of content we got overall in Battlefield 5. And whether that means sacrificing some of the lesser used modes like single player, co-op campaigns and battle royale, then so be it. Because at the end of the day, gamers these days will be much more impressed by the quality of a Battlefield game's multiplayer and the amount of content it's going to receive, rather than something that only a minority of players are even going to bother about. If your flashy new Battlefield game launches with loads of maps, guns and equipment, which can be enjoyed for many years to come, but at the expense of sacking off a bog standard 5-hour campaign that nobody would really care about, then I honestly wouldn't mind that at all. And I wouldn't even be too surprised if Battlefield 2020 turns out to be multiplayer only, because multiplayer builds hype and hype drives sales. Quite a few people do enjoy Battlefield single player and co-op modes, so getting rid of them completely might annoy some of these players. But I'm pretty sure that DICE is going to want to focus much more on the multiplayer side of things with its new game, to try and get all of those fans it lost over 2019 back on board with the franchise once again. And the last reason of the video why Battlefield 2020 has the potential to be a brilliant game is also down to the sheer pressure that's going to be put on the game to not only stand out from the crowd, but also deliver a well-crafted and well-received product. Battlefield is constantly at competition with loads of other games pretty much all the time, with the biggest competitor typically being Call of Duty, mainly just down to it being a very popular FPS game. Now over the years, COD's also had its fair share of community backlashes and negative receptions, from the whole boots on the ground thing to shady loot box strategies to unwanted time errors. And although it's consistently been a very successful franchise, it's definitely had its ups and downs, especially with the themes that more of the recent games have been portraying, pushing immature, dumb things to essentially try and cater for kids and Fortnite fans. Well, it looks like there might be a bit of a shift in this style, because the new Modern Warfare is generally being marketed as a grittier game with more realistic, darker tones, similar to those that were pushed in the original Modern Warfare, made in 2007. It's received a hell of a lot of hype, and can be considered to be one of COD's most anticipated titles for a very long time, mainly down to its developers identifying what the fans really want, and trying to deliver a product that caters for them. Battlefield's competition with COD hasn't been this tough for quite a while, because for once, it's the COD game that seems to be pleasing the masses, and the Battlefield game that's pushing them away. With higher bars being set, and bigger expectations required to succeed, the next Battlefield game really has to be something special if it wants any sort of chance to compete. And with there also undoubtedly being another COD game releasing next year too, also on the next gen consoles, utilising its brand new graphics engine, Plus the fact that it could potentially be riding on a wave of success from this year means there's going to be a hell of a lot of pressure on DICE to get their next Battlefield game right. COD's not the only competition either, because you've also got to account for all the new launch titles and big blockbuster exclusives that are likely to release alongside the new consoles too. Not to mention the already popular games like Fortnite, Apex Legends and PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds that are still likely to be popular next year too. So all of this healthy competition could be accountable for a much better end result, because DICE now need to convince players to buy their next game, market said game a hell of a lot better than they did with Battlefield 5, and create a product that they truly believe will win over a large portion of the market. Otherwise, there's going to be some massive problems for the franchise going forward, as 2020 could essentially be the year that Battlefield comes back in spectacular fashion, or very unfortunately dies out as a franchise forever. The pressure's definitely on. So there's 5 pretty big reasons why I think the next Battlefield game will be amazing, possibly even the best so far. DICE really need to make this one for the fans, and make something that's truly something to get excited about, that'll appeal to the vast majority of players. But of course, these are just a few of my personal theories on this topic, though I'd love to hear what you guys all think about the next Battlefield game, and what you'd personally like to see in the upcoming title. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Thanks for watching guys, drop me a like if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe and hit that notifications bell to be the first to see new content coming up soon. Take it easy, and I'll be seeing you in that next episode.